Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten Patton, and I'm the program manager here at ATARC, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academics Research Center, and we are a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I would like to welcome all of our attendees, and a special thanks to Brian Reed, Nora Conlin, Jeffrey Miller, and the rest of the Now Secure team. This afternoon, we are going to hear from our panelists, followed by a Q&A session where we will also pop up a few polls and answer your questions. So before we begin, I just want to encourage the audience to please submit questions of your own in the Q&A section of this platform, and also remember to answer the poll questions in order to ensure you receive your CPE credit. And with that, I would like if our panelists could please come on camera, and we'll go ahead and do a round of introductions to start things off. So I'll have you all introduce yourself. If you could please share with us who you are, what agency you're with, and what your role is at the agency, as well as anything else you'd like to share with our audience up top. Now would be the time. If we could start with Christopher, please.
Sure, yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Christ, and I'm here at U.S. Transportation Command. I've been here for a few years now. When I first got started, I was actually the chief of DevSecOps and pushing that forward. But my role has transformed recently to just digital transformation, chief of digital transformation or enterprise transformation, with a lot of DevOps at the core of what we're trying to do. You know, goes to extra concepts like cloud migration activities, to things like zero trust, achieving a continuous HO through the RMF process, and then getting to machine learning and AI ops. So a lot of it centered around DevOps, but that's primarily what I'm doing here, and happy to be here today.
Great, thank you. And let's move over to Dr. Rodriguez next.
Hello, thanks, Kristen. I just need to start with a little disclaimer to say that, while I'm here representing the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, anything I say does not constitute a legal interpretation, guidance, or advice of the Bureau itself, and I will not be commenting on anything in front of the Bureau in terms of a matter, and that any opinions or views that I state are my own views and may not represent the Bureau's views. But I serve and am honored to be the Chief Information Security Officer at the Bureau. This is my third federal place that I have worked. But I have an extensive background in other industry positions where I've been able to do Agile and DevOps type activity, to include Cisco systems, and as a contractor at Treasury Education, Pentagon, FAA, and other Fortune 500 companies. I'm an academic author. I've contributed to NIST standards, and my background is that I have a bachelor's degree from Wisconsin, a master's degree for me, and I just finished my doctorate from George Washington University, where I did a dissertation quantitatively examining comprehensive cybersecurity within the federal organizational environment.
That's awesome. Congrats on your achievements. And we will move over to Brian next.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Brian Reed. I'm the Chief Mobility Officer here at Now Secure. We work a lot with federal and civilian agencies on securing their pipelines, and really are specialists in mobile application security. My DNA goes back to the days of BlackBerry, which was the secure mobile device for so many years before they got steamrolled basically by Apple and Google. I've had the privilege in working with a lot of federal organizations in many mobile initiatives these days, a lot around mobile DevSecOps initiatives, and we'll share some of those stories today. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And then over to Raven next.
Hey, Kirsten, thanks for inviting me. I am Raven Manuel. I am the Senior Application Developer and the DevOps Engineer for the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is a unit under the Smithsonian. Right now, I have a couple of things that I do since I have a few roles. I'm sort of like the R&D department, so I kind of look for new technologies or technologies that are actually changing, and I try to see how those technologies can create solutions that might be pain points within our organization, not just for our unit, but that can be used across the Smithsonian. As a DevOps engineer, I do kind of the same thing, kind of like R&D, checking out technologies. I make suggestions about process improvements. I kind of create policy, whether that's followed or not. And right now for the DevOps scene, I'm trying to figure out how at the local level, meaning at the unit level or the team level, we can integrate security without having to, before the application actually has to do like a system scan or whatever, really trying to figure out a way to monitor applications for leaks and just for to have secure deving. And it's kind of like a impossible dream. That's it.
I'm also going to put a plug for Raven. She's the government chair of our application development working group at ATARC. So thank you for doing that, Raven. And then Paula.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paula Wagner. I am the Systems Delivery Division Chief for U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services under DHS. And within the Systems Delivery Division, we manage a little over $160 million worth of projects. And we have about 90 feds and we have about 500 contractors. We focus on software delivery and meeting our business expectations. Prior to being at CIS, I was at ICE, and then prior to that, I was at Treasury. So Kirsten, thanks for having me here. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you all. So for our audience, again, we have prepared questions that we're about to dive right into, but we love making these as interactive as possible. So if something stands out to you that you want to comment on or ask any specific panelists about to elaborate further, please utilize the chat to do so. And then panelists, for me as the moderator, it's easiest if you remain on mute the entire time. And then if you want to weigh in on a question, go ahead, come off mute. I'll watch the screen so that I know that you would like to respond. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and pose the first question over to Paula. Paula, why has DevOps gained prominence over the last few years? Could you please share with us your experience or some insight into why you think that is?
Yeah, great question. I know my fellow panelists also probably have lots of good experience around this, but I think for us, at least at CIS, we really leveraged it to bring security as part of our DevOps experience. So we moved from DevOps to DevSecOps. And so by doing that, we've been able to iterate in a much faster and more efficient manner. So most of our teams within USCIS and within the Systems Delivery Division, we're able to deploy multiple times a day. And in previous times before we've kind of moved to this model, we were deploying, maybe once every 2 weeks at the end of a sprint, which we noticed working with the business that, they needed these requirements and these functionality much faster. And so by implementing this new approach to DevOps, we got security involved. We have consistent monitoring. We still have some improvements we need to make, especially around governance and the tools that we leverage. But as far as meeting expectations, and then also just in the meantime, being able to save some funds, which has been helpful for us over the past couple of years, we've really been successful with implementing on a much quicker and faster way to deliver functionality.
Thank you, Paula. And Chris, did you want to weigh in on this one as well?
Sure. Yeah, I think I'll leave it more specific to the Department of Defense, just to kind of narrow it down a bit. I think in recent years we've seen a lot of awesome guidance and coming down from the DoD CIO and the Air Force Chief Software Officer that was put in place to help us out. And we've seen a ton of educational opportunities through that endeavor. I mean, an entire organization stood up to help out with DevOps processes. And so I think that that's really helpful, at least with the DoD. It's been helpful for us to kind of kickstart some things. And just a couple of weeks ago, for example, there was a memorandum that came out from the DoD CISO on how to achieve a continuous authority to operate, a continuous ATO. And they went over three main things, with one of those things being adhering to a DevSecOps reference design. So we're just seeing a lot more things that are coming that really have DevSecOps as the foundation of how to make things happen. So we look into like Zero Trust, for example, there's DevSecOps practices in that. Or if you look to achieving that continuous ATO, again, DevSecOps practices, or even where we're going with machine learning or AI ops, again, some DevOps practices are there. So I think that perhaps we're seeing a lot more of it because it's just, in order to get to B, you have to start with A, which hopefully more often than not would be DevOps.
And Raven, do you have any additional insight or feedback for this question?
Yes, thank you. I have a passion for this one. My perspective is not from an institution per se, it's technology, because I worked for a .edu and a .org when DevOps was actually started. And I noticed that the trend kind of started in the early 2000s with Agile. And so when you have Agile, it's actually the thing that makes it so that you can have iterative development and all of the pipeline. And because Agile likes to make these self-forming teams and likes to make sure that in order to get the process from point A to point B to delivery, you actually need to have all the stakeholders involved. And because one of the stakeholders, other than the development team, is the operations team or the people that are systems and security, you had to actually bring them in. So there was this, how do we bring them in? The next thing that came into play, which I think actually made DevOps prominent, is the introduction of some tools like containers. Right? And so now you have containers, and this is supposed to help the dev team I'm a developer, so that's like my perspective. So it helps the dev team. So if you have multiple developers from different places, and we have contractors, vendors at all sorts of places, that we didn't have to worry about the environment, right? That all of the environments were actually standardized, and you didn't have to worry about whether a person had the correct tools or the correct base. Throw in GitHub, okay, and Git. And so now you have this technology where, to facilitate Agile and the ability to push and pull, you've got now this particular really big, strong, I mean, there was Subversion, CVS, and there was TFS, like all of these, it's Foundation Server, that's for Microsoft, for people. You had all of these technologies driven together to help support Agile. And then for me personally, I think DevOps, DevSecOps, those things are actually marketing terms, because they're actually things that were in practice already. People were already actually doing it. Now you have to give a name to it because the tools are out there. So where do these tools fit in? They're not Agile tools because that's a methodology, right? And DevOps and DevSecOps are kind of a methodology as well. But now we have DevOps trying to put into words that synergy between development and operations, along with their tools, along with their practices together. And I think that is why this whole big industry actually has come into prominence, because it has a name, and we can actually touch it and actually subscribe or prescribe tools and processes and things to the thing. Because I don't really think DevOps is new. I think it actually has always been, except for it's been siloed, right? But Agile made it so that you actually have to kind of merge it together. And that's why I think it's really not about the organization. It was about this zeitgeist of tools and processes that actually created it. The end.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Do any of our other panelists want to weigh in or comment on that before we continue on? Because we did get a couple. Go
I
ahead.
mean, in the end, it's really all about the speed to mission, right? Providing value and consistent results in a way that is mature and focuses on getting us to where we need to be as quickly as possible. Nobody is interested in long, slow disappointment. And we've been able to turn the tide away from that history to what we're seeing today.
Absolutely. Paula?
Yeah, just one thing I would add is to Raven's point, she's right. I think that we have had DevOps for a long time. I think Agile has made it easier for us to leverage, but I also think that being able to include security as part of that process and getting that security as part of the development coding so that we can consistently be monitoring and testing, I think that's helped us a lot with getting better code pushed out into production.
All right, thank you all for that. So I want to turn our panelists' attention over to two audience questions that came in while we were having this conversation. So please take a moment to read those, and if you'd like to respond, we will do so in just a moment. While you do that, I'm going to ask if our first poll question could please come up, and this is for the audience. So audience, please take a moment to respond to our first poll question. We'll be up any second now. I thought it'd be up any second now. Poll number 1. All right, well, poll number 1 will be up in just a moment. So maybe you guys have had enough time to read through the audience questions that have come in. So first audience question, it would be really great to learn about a specific area or issue within the software development lifecycle that you see the most room for improvement. I think this might have came up when Paula was responding the first time, but Dr. Rodriguez, did you want to respond? I see you're off mute. Or were you just off mute?
So what I would say is the thing that happens most often is that the developers and security are not engaged as early as possible. And so there may be some underlying assumptions or decisions made before everyone gets involved. And I would say that that is an opportunity for improvement. And it doesn't matter what code type, just making sure that you have the right people at the table is important.
Thank you. And then Brian.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so I think when we look at the hundreds of pipelines that we've worked with, the biggest bang for the buck we've seen besides what Tina responded to, which is the bringing the two together, is actually training. So security training for developers and including security requirements within the application lifecycle are two ways to have the biggest impact on security at speed. There's lots of tools you can deploy. There's lots of other things you can do. But well-trained developers who have relationships with the security team will write secure code from the start, and that's what gives you max velocity in the pipeline.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And then Paula, I think you were about to respond.
Yeah, so if I look at it from, the question of the software development lifecycle, for us, it's definitely requirements. That piece is always difficult, and we always get so many different requirements. We have so many different priorities, and with resourcing and funding, we can't take care of everything. So I think for us, looking at it from a requirements perspective and working with our product owners to be very specific. The other piece that we're looking at to try and help us with requirements and tracking requirements and being able to give progress is we're trying to come up with a labeling system in Jira for all of our development teams, so that when we're putting in user stories or putting in themes or putting in epics, that they're labeled in a manner that we can then run reports off, leveraging Jira, leveraging Tableau, whichever, so we can do a better job of giving status of where the development teams are with some sort of functionality. But as far as as far as the life cycle, requirements is definitely our strong part of the cycle that is needing most of help.
Thank you, Paula. And then Raven.
Thank you. I actually agree with Brian, but it's like a step before. So training is one of the biggest things, and also the ability to have them in requirements. But before that is the ability to be able to know that there is a problem. So it's one thing to understand that when you are looking at your patches and all of these things that happen with the code, but when you now put them and you integrate everything together, they actually make something different. All right. So you have like this big, huge other system that didn't exist or maybe did exist. And now this thing has to call this thing, and this thing has to call this thing, and there's leakage. There are other security things that are that happen that individually they wouldn't have happened because you've actually checked the patches and whatever. But there are no tools. I've been with several vendors and looking at various tools to monitor, and monitoring tools are great because they let you know if something's not talking to something, but none of those tools actually let you know if something is open to attack or is open to be changed. Or if there's a password, and this should not happen. It's actually in a checklist, but nothing can tell you that a password has just been sent to something else in the clear. So the lack of insight into observability into the code as it's interacting with all the various systems or modules is a problem, I think, within this sphere. So it goes before training. We actually have to have some tools that we can actually be trained on so we can look for these type of things.
Okay, thank you guys for those responses. This next question from the same person in our audience: are there obstacles within procurement of DevOps solutions that make it easier for your agency to use open source software versus Cots, COTS? Paula?
Hey, Kirsten, I can take this, at least from CIS. No, we don't have any issues with procurements. I will say that CIS always tends to migrate to open source. We do have a number of low code, no code platforms that we're trying to expand across the enterprise. But from a procurement perspective, no, we don't have any issues.
Okay, thank you, Paula. Dr. Rodriguez?
Yeah, we also don't have any procurement issues one way or the other. It's just about making sure we do our diligence and continually check the cyber hygiene profile of the organization or the foundation, for example, if we're Apache, to make sure that we're consistently aware of the supply chain and the risks we're facing.
And Brian, did you want to respond?
Just simply going to add, SCA and supply chain security are a huge deal. That's also a high impact area, both in terms of the blast radius, as we've seen with TrustWave and others, but also in terms of an area where if you have good hygiene, as Dr. Rodriguez says, then you can protect yourself and operate in a safe mode. So it's an opportunity for bad things to happen, but the best organizations are focusing on leveraging good quality open source, verifying the sources, and I think the software bill of materials, SCA, and labeling requirements that are coming through the EO that'll work their way across the government into civilian world will ultimately improve everything for everybody.
Great. Thank you all for your responses. And then another question that came through: in federal agencies, who are doing the major part DevOps implementation and support? Is it the contractors or federal resources? Means to ask, federal side prepared well to sustain the effort? Means to.
Can I kick a talk at this, Kirsten? Do you mind?
Yeah, and if we need clarification, you could let this person know and then they could.
Okay, I don't understand the second part, but the first part of the question, who's doing the major part of DevOps implementation and support? the team is basically doing that, because that's what DevOps is actually for. It's getting everybody to work together. For our units, specifically my museum, the way our process and policy works is that I, as the lead, I bring in the security person and I bring in the operations person, which sometimes is me as well, because we're working in the cloud, and then the main developers. And so what we do is we come up with, I have a, it's not a checklist, it's kind of like a strategy where we look at things in very big, broad picture, and we see what needs to fit in there. And then we decide what has to happen, whether or not we need to use a tool or whether there is a policy we need to follow, whether it's internal or federal. And then when we figure out what needs to happen, then we figure out who has to do it. And so if it's a developer trying to do something, as like Brian said, if we had training and we were able to understand how to do security at a unit, a piece of code level, then we would do that. If it is the system, then the security team does that. If it's QA, then QA does it. So it's really everybody has to do the implementation and everybody has to actually support it, regardless of whether you're contracted or federal. That's the only part I could answer, actually.
Oh, that was great. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, so I think that's a really great answer, which is the people responsible are the people who are responsible, meaning if you have internal development, then they're part of it. If you have internal ops, they're part of it. If it's outsourced and you're using contractors, then it's outsourced. But it's having all the stakeholders at the table involved in building the successful, DevOps and DevSecOps process from an operational perspective is what's important. And Raven's points about getting all the stakeholders, having the checklist and understanding, I think are key. I've been a lot in the Air Force, and the Best Spin team is an internally run, internally sourced, internally optimized group, and they leverage experts from the outside and from across the government as well as part of building their quite sophisticated program at this point. If you think about the insource versus outsource, it really goes back to where are your apps being built, who's involved in building the apps. And there are some great outside of federal resources to help you get started, how to build a DevOps program, how to learn how to set one up, right? So for example, Raven and I were reminiscing yesterday over something called ADDO, All Day DevOps. It's 24 hours of free learning on how to set up DevOps. So we encourage you to take advantage of a lot of the publicly free available resources, as well as some of the suppliers who have training programs and can mentor you through setting up the program.
All right. Thank you guys for answering that. Oh, Paula, go ahead.
Oh, just one thing real quick is, at least at CIS, we're lucky. We actually have federal development teams. So we have engineers, we have designers, we have Scrum Masters, product owners. So I would say for us, it's a little bit of both. We rely heavily on our partners or our contractors. But as Raven said, we're all one team. And that's hugely important for us in order to make everything work. So, we've got a great CTO who leads the charge. We've got Confluence pages that help us with making sure that all the teams are on the same page. So, it really does matter, who's part and what role they have. And so without strong PMs and without strong federal support, it'd be hard for contractors, and then it would be hard for federal without contractor support. So it's a family, it's a team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Udaya, for sending in those questions. And if if you wanted us to answer another part of it, just go ahead and chat me again on the side. Paula, this one's for you as well. How does USCIS DOS practice relate to the broader DHS DSO guidance? Does USCIS consider itself a leader and/or reference architecture for the broader DHS family?
I would like to think we are. Dave Larimore will probably laugh. So yeah, I think that we work together, and we have our CTOs, our CTO is Rob Brown, and I know he meets with the CTO for ICE, for CBP, with Dave Larimore at HQ, and then the CIOs do the same as well. And we have recently just shared about 13 different Tableau reports across the agency. using our Delta Share, which has been amazing. So we're able to get data across the different components much faster. We're also sharing ServiceNow. So we recently just shared our CARB process with HQ and with ICE, I think it was. And so we're doing a lot more sharing across the organization, which I think has been super helpful. And when it comes to the, let's see, DSO guidance, yeah, I mean, we follow that. I think that we, help implement that within CIS. In some aspects, I think we're a little bit ahead, but in other aspects, we're always looking to improve. So yeah, we've been much better about looking at architecture across the broader DHS family.
All right, great, thank you. Okay, next audience question, and we're about to Chris joining us again. There we go. All right, so with training being such a key for max velocity, how do you identify skills gaps and address them? Brian?
I'm happy to respond since I brought up the training part. I think it's a very good question, right? So skills gaps can vary widely, right? So there's fundamental training around what is a DevSecOps or DevOps program and how does it run, and getting all the stakeholders on board there. So there's a class of training. You should just assume if anybody in your key stakeholders haven't been in a DevOps team before, they need training to understand what it is, what their role is, and what their team's role is. I think what's interesting out from the general learning categories is there's actually a lot of free training in the market now that you can take advantage of. Yesterday, I was just helping lead a half-day training with Owasp online for the security side of the house. So it's how to operate security and become a pen tester who does pen testing in a DevSecOps pipeline. Now, that may sound like an oxymoron of pen testing at DevSecOps speed, but there are strategies that can be applied in order to do the learning, side of the house from that perspective. I think as a general rule, I come from the mobile side, so I'll speak to mobile and doing lots of mobile application development over the last 20 years and now more recently security. Most mobile developers don't know security, so you should presume they need training. And platforms like Now Secure have free training. We have something called Academy. It's online. You can sign up, you can go, and you can spend 60 hours learning everything you need to know. The training that's there, by the way, was actually training that was funded by the Air Force Bespin team under a SIBR, and we made it freeware. So it is available. So if you do have mobile teams, you might take advantage of the freeware there. However you go about doing it, having someone like Raven, who's kind of the central hub and command, and having that type of person kind of own and help drive training across the team while also driving the enablement and the operations. Make sure you have someone who owns training. Don't just say, go get trained, because you'll never get there.
That was great. Thank you. Any other panelists want to weigh in, or we can move on to the next question?
What I would say is that role-based training that is already required can greatly enhance this, and then just making sure that as part of that you work with recognize how the citizen is desiring increased autonomy, transparency, safety, and prosperity. So you have to balance all of that with this, and that they don't want sloppy interfaces, buggy code, easy breaches of their privacy. So that's part of the training, right? Where I've seen perhaps in other previous teams, they'll be like, oh, do we have to do that? Just knowing that these are core value foundational elements is part of what you have to incorporate and inculcate through training into your team.
Great insight. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next audience question that's come along. Does AI and ML learning have a place in your agency's DevOps? I see Paula shaking her head. Yes. You want to respond to that one, Paula?
Sure. Yeah. So we recently are working on setting up our governance around leveraging RPA, or our tool of choice is UiPath at this point. But we're lucky enough to have some RPA as part of ServiceNow and Salesforce. But yeah, we've started testing out, what do bots look like in our organization. I think where we're still working on our strategy is with, unattended bots and how do you manage them and what's the governance around them. And so that's where we are, still trying to figure out that piece. And then also we're working to set up our citizen development so that, folks in the business across the organization, they can build their own bots with whatever process that they were looking to automate. So our future is citizen development, and RPA has a big piece in that.
Great. And Chris, you're back. We lost you for a minute there.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's okay.
I'll chime in on that one too as well. I think I guess this is a DevOps forum, so I don't know how far I should go into this. I'm not trying to go too deep into the technical details, but when we think about Kubernetes environments or a runtime environment, leveraging Kubernetes, pushing our containers and things like that. So we're looking into a tool. I'm not going to drop the name of the tool, but we're looking into a tool that would allow for that capability. Looking at machine learning, and that it's monitoring. So part of continuous monitoring in a way, but it's monitoring or looking at your cluster, your nodes, your pods, and seeing if they're, it's querying up data and gathering what looks like normal behavior in that environment. And so over the course of time, you may have a month worth of data, maybe 6 months worth of data, but it knows what is normal behavior for your environment. And so then if it sees that something's abnormal or an anomaly, it will work with the service mesh, and it will isolate or quarantine that pod that houses that concern or issue until someone can look at that and see what's going on. So we're certainly looking forward to seeing how we can make that work in our environment as we get towards more, ML ops type stuff, or really in that case, something that helps us with some machine learning capability.
Great. Thank you. And then, unless anyone else wants to weigh in on that one, the next question I'll jump to is anyone using TOGAF? And I personally am not familiar with that acronym. Maybe somebody on the panel is. Okay, Dr. Rodriguez, I see you shaking your head.
I am familiar with it, but we're not using that framework.
Not using it. Okay. What does it stand for, since we're on the topic?
I believe it is an architecture framework.
Okay, got it.
It's the Open Group Architecture Framework is what it stands for.
Oh, the Open Group Architecture Framework. Got it. Okay, so no one on the panel is currently using it. Okay, sorry, we can't provide a response beyond that. When choosing a tool, how important is Fedramp in your decision-making process? And I see Chris is already starting to respond. So Chris, do you want to respond to that one aloud?
Sure. Yeah, this is something that I've spoken to a bit in the past. I think from our perspective here, it just depends on if it's a SaaS offering. That's one big thing, at least for us, that we've felt we really wanted to take advantage of some certain products out there that were offering a SaaS, but we could not move forward because they weren't yet FedRAMP approved. And so we've had that challenge here internally. Some amazing products out there, some great ideas. But we're having to work through that. And as I mentioned before, organizations can sponsor that effort. They can work with that vendor. So a government entity or organization can sponsor that and get that process going for the FedRAMP approval process. But it can be time consuming.
All right, Paula?
I was just going to say our CISO, which I'm sure a lot of you know, he would definitely not be okay if something was not FedRAMPed. I'm sure Dr. Tina has something she wants to add.
Yeah, with my CISO hat firmly atop my head, I would say that I have a strong preference for FedRAMP. For anything that is cloud-based, it's 22 times less work for the cybersecurity team in particular. So if there's any way to get a capability out of FedRAMP, we will do that first. And as part of our enterprise architecture approach to look at that with a real critical eye. If it isn't something that's available, we have either done independent ATOs or have offered to sponsor key technologies in the past through the FedRAMP process. But we have to really want it, is the short answer. But sometimes we do. And that is that is a business decision that thankfully my current CIO, Chris Chilbert, is encouraging us to consider.
Excellent. Thank you all. So we're going to take a break from the audience questions. We'll go back to them in a moment. I see another one just came through, but let's just make sure that we cover, where do you see the future of DevOps going, since that is the topic of conversation for this panel discussion. So the future, who would like to provide some insight from government? And we can also turn it over to industry as well. But where do you see all this going, or would want to see all this going? So Brian, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, a couple of things. We've touched on some of them here, like use of AI and ML, for example. I think what becomes quite interesting, we're working on a lot of projects with IoT involvement. So now you're talking about, how do you have a DevSecOps pipeline run that has to talk to a thing, jet engine, repair parts, medical technology in theater, things like that. So I think we're going to see some interesting evolutions around something we've seen called parallel pipes strategy, where you have pipeline automation for the core software, and then you have some manual special activity that's occurring as you're building and testing these IoT connected things. So that means some variations in DevOps, where in DevOps and DevSecOps, we're trying to automate everything, but we still have to factor in, especially when you're talking about things, how you're going to handle those. So I think that's one of the bigger trends that we're seeing with the mobilization of all of our agencies and all of our workforce. The second thing is autonomous operation, which may or may not be machine learning and AL, and that is really getting to the point where the pipelines are self-running, self-nurturing, and humans are only involved in exception handling, not operationals. And we've actually seen some pipelines running that way, where generally they're running, I'm not going to call it 5 nines, but they're running continuously, and the bulk of everything is scripted and automated. And so the humans are more counseling, coaching, exception handling than doing some of the steps manually through the process. So as you think about moving through a maturity curve, think about, can you get into that sort of autonomous mode? Ruthlessly work through automating everything you can in the process, leverage orchestration tools to do things like that. Make sure you're building in observability into everything you build, and that allows you then to get the visibility on top if everything you have in your pipeline, including the things you build, have observability built into them. So those are a few thoughts, I think, about where we're going.
Thank you. Dr. Rodriguez?
Yeah, I think that part of that core foundation for execution has to be making sure that you're aware of the sensitivity of the data. I've seen it where you can get a little too automated and you get so far down the line that mistakes have been made because those types of detection mechanisms weren't built in. So data engineering, data science, all that sort of thing. The other thing that needs to be automated is drift detection. Brian brought up deviations, but sometimes people do wrong things on purpose. So making sure that that type of key technology is built in to your security as code, your infrastructure as code, and so that you use the human big beautiful brain to make sure that everything is done with a focus, and that it's targeting the user and the mission, and that you haven't had anything that intentionally or unintentionally went awry. And then you're just driven by those goals to define what done looks like, so that you are always achieving that citizen success.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any other panelists want to respond to that before we move on? Okay, well then in that case, I want to again turn your attention over to the audience questions. Go ahead and skim them. If you want to respond, we can do so momentarily. But we will pop up our second poll question here. However, I see Raven. Did you want to say anything, Raven?
I was going to respond to that first one about Gartner's opined to APIs. We are, especially myself, we are very API heavy because we have a lot of proprietary internal systems. And as a museum and the Smithsonian as a whole, we have a centralized collection management system. And what we have tried to do is go digital, especially COVID pushed a lot of the different units, but my unit was already there. And the problem is getting the objects and the images of the objects, the metadata of the objects from the proprietary systems out to the web. without using a CMS, because there's a Drupal module that we could use that hooks in. But for myself, I make a lot of applications that are for interactives within the museum, and I need to get that data out. So what I've been doing, since a lot of the technologies I use is open source, is following the, what is it called? Open Web Application Security Project. Yes. Oh, thanks, Brian. I can read lips. Thanks goodness. And so we've been following that. And even though they don't have a framework, they do tell you what to look for. And that's actually the biggest thing, is to tell you either what to look for or what will happen if you don't look for it. So we've been developing, I've been developing checklists and processes and policies around that particular security advisement, to be able to monitor my APIs, because I am actually the only person that's making APIs at the moment for our unit. We don't have the contractors actually do that. So it's very, very important, just because OCIO, our enterprise IT, is very touchy about me touching things from inside the network and posting them on the outside. So security is a very big thing, and they're fine with me using that as long as I come up with a good strategy and they approve it. That's it.
Excellent. Thank you. Brian, did you want to?
Yeah, I'll just a few things. So Owasp, they do standards and best practices for web, mobile, and API. There's a new Owasp Api project that started in 2019. If you're interested in API sec, have a look at that. It is in its infancy. It is a real attack vector. If you follow the MITRE mobile attack vector or the MITRE web attack vector, it's there. If you want to talk offline, I can give you some case studies of real attacks that have occurred at the API level. You should see most of your security vendors expanding their ability to help protect you at that layer. One thing to think about, you may have people on your team who are responsible for application security. Make sure someone on your team owns API security. Have them be the canary in the coal mine, have them start their learning process, have them become educated, and get that process starting in your organization as you move to an API-driven backend, for sure.
Thank you, Brian. Any other panelists before we move on to the next question? Okay, this one I thought was interesting as well. In looking at your business requirements, what is the most salient or common requirement? Is it UX, the user experience, or security, or compliance, or mobility, or speed to market, or something else? And Chris, you responded with security and speed to market, improving capability delivery. Did you want to elaborate upon that further?
Sure. From my perspective, I really feel like I would want to focus more on the user experience. I think, when you put the end user in mind, you can accomplish a lot of things. You can empathize with what they're going through, and then you can connect what it is that they're hopeful for to what it is you're trying to do from a DevSecOps perspective. I think that could be a really powerful thing. But certainly organizations' priorities, security for sure. security. You hear that all the time. And then delivering capability faster. The question of why do we want to do DevOps? Why do we want to put so much time and effort into doing DevSecOps? I think that we've all kind of huddled around a very simple phrase, which is just improve the time that it takes to deliver a product.
Thank you. Paula?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think from, our business requirements perspective, they're always asking us to improve the way that they do business. So we're very much a paper-based component. And so a lot of times our folks are asking us, can you automate this process for us to make it faster? We have premium processing where we have to get, people pay extra to get a benefit process faster. And we're having a hard time meeting just the premium processing, let alone the regular processing. So we have a large backlog. And so, we're looking to technology to help us improve the way that we do business. And so from my perspective, at least at CIS, I think they'd be okay with, UX, but really they're like, just make it easier for us to do our job.
Yeah, absolutely. Raven?
I agree with Chris as far as for our organization, it's actually delighting the visitor is really the the big overarching thing that we try to do is, and the other is education. So the business requirements are always focused on what is it that we're trying to teach visitors when they visit the website or they come into the museums or the galleries? What is it that we're trying to get across? And those are the driving factors. And so if we cannot teach what we're trying to teach and get that across, and if we're not delighting the visitors and giving them a unique experience, then I can't say nothing else matters, but that's really what we live for, which is delivering educational experiences. And so that's what our driver is for business requirements.
Thank you. And Dr. Rodriguez?
So part of what I like to do is to tag along with Raven is to help the customers understand what the magic and moonbeams are that they're hoping for the mission. I think all of us have been in the unfortunate position of giving people what they asked for, which wasn't what they wanted. And so helping them suss out the truth of that answer. And that's why DevOps in particular avoids that disappointment piece I mentioned earlier. Our citizens and our users are increasingly more sophisticated, and they have a better idea of what they want that user experience to be. And those things like security, they're assuming are there, right? It's almost like the electricity. You don't think about it until you lose it for 3 days. You just need to make sure that it's built in and it's built into federal sufficiency. So I like to say that we want to be just enough security, right? We're not trying to get an A+, we're not trying to pack it in concrete and keep it. We need it to be available. We need it to be so that people can get done what they need to in those time frames. And I know Paula and team are in the same area where I am, where they don't want it today, they want it yesterday. So part of what we've worked on is getting solutions built and authorized in days, right? So not just a code drop multiple times a day, and I applaud USCIS for that because we built a lot of what we did on that model, but making sure that it's the whole cloud and that we're doing it regularly. So the good news is we're able to do that well. The bad news is it can be a little too popular. But just understanding right now, you would not buy a car without a safety belt, and you would also understand that with that safety belt, it won't hold back the speed of your vehicle. It just gets you there fast and in one piece.
Okay, Brian?
Yeah, that's very true. I think in that laundry list of what's more important as we're having the conversation, one of the things I spend a lot of time with organizations on is practicing incrementalism. So think about what's the smallest thing you can build on existing infrastructure within your process that meets that user need, that you can roll out quickly, that's resilient. Funny joke from a roundtable I was at about 2 years ago up at an agency meeting up in Canada, where the people around the table said, we just spent the last 5 years building one website and one mobile app that does everything. Now we're blowing it up into 100 websites and 100 mobile apps because each one does one, and that'll make us faster and more agile. And I think that's a big way to think about it when we specialize in mobile. And when we look at these mobile projects, it's like one small thing. I need to fill out a form. I need to do inventory. I need to reassign an aircraft. I need to move some equipment, right? Think about small atomic units in this process, and that will allow you to have fast delivery. That allows you to have rapid iteration. You can build a simple user interface that your users will like. You can leverage the APIs and infrastructure you have. All the whole building big monolithic stuff is gone in the DevOps world. Realistically, it really is.
Absolutely. Okay. Awesome. So this might be the last question we have time for, but to Raven, you mentioned that your OCIO is somewhat sensitive about making internal systems externally accessible. What is your approach for automating the security compliance aspect, things like system impact analysis? Do you have compliance folks on your DevSecOps team?
Thanks, Steve, for asking that question. It is really important. We do not automate anything because just like Dr. Tina said, they like to use their brains and touch because they don't trust that automation is going to catch everything. But we do have tools. So what OCIO does provide is access to their security scanning tools, which we use. But unfortunately, they're only go system deep. And so my goal and my mission to be a good citizen and work with OCIO is to help them find tools that actually go deeper. And because the way we're developing things in pieces like microservices and using APIs, because we are using little components that talk to things. Their system scans are only getting things that are in the box. They're not even really getting things into the container. And that's why we can't really automate, because we're actually looking for better ways to get security at the minutest, the least smallest level, because that's really, really important. And that's why I really kind of focus on that. But I appreciate your question. Thanks.
Yeah, great. We had a lot of excellent audience questions, super interactive. So with that, I'm going to ask if our third and final poll question could please be put up on the screen. And with 5 minutes, there we go. So for folks at home, in your opinion, how important is emerging technology to the importance of the future of DevSecOps? So go ahead and reply to that one. I would love to go around and just hear from you all individually on your final thoughts that you would like to leave our audience with, whether it be some advice or resources you want to direct people to, words of wisdom to live by, or any key takeaway that you really took from this conversation. Whatever it is that you'd want to share, this is your stage to communicate with the audience before we conclude our webinar today. So I'll ask Chris if you could please kick us off with the outros.
Sure. I'll actually stick with something I heard Brian mention earlier about the API, having somebody involved with that, right? So don't just let it go. You need to have somebody who's responsible for that, who stays on top of it. So I would say that if there's anyone out there that's hopeful for to implement a DevSecOps culture in an organization, I think that I could bring up a lot of different things, but perhaps one of the most challenging things, especially if you have a large organization that has a ton of different teams, is that education piece, having someone continually there to educate and be involved. That is what I think I missed the challenge question maybe earlier, but that has certainly been a big part of our challenge here, is just continuing to educate. And you cannot expect for someone that wants to understand to know DevOps just within an hour's brief. It's not going to work that way. And so you have to continue to keep going, continue to keep pushing, and continue to have opportunities for people to learn how to move forward with it. Get them to understand why it's important and help them to connect what they're currently doing to where they can go.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And then we'll jump over to Paula next.
Hey there. So one thing I would take away is that DevSecOps is a team effort. So don't try and do it on your own. And everyone has a purpose and a role, and leverage that. And hopefully you'll be successful. And feel free to always reach out to me, or I'm sure anybody else on the panel, for any insights or pointers, or if you have any additional questions. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's jump to Dr. Rodriguez next.
I'm going to pile on to what Paula and Chris said, but I like to take a tip from the Book of Queen, which was a bold band from the 1970s. If you don't know what it is, that group did not avoid conflict. They used conflict to constructively make their music better, and the same is true in this area. And that doesn't mean take your drummer and make it a lead guitarist. It takes each area of talent to make the full production. Each part needs to shine. And if there's something part of the team, is that you have to work not only on the technical skills, on the social skills, and that's part of what you have to do. So in a DevOps team, the most important part remains the team, and that you have to work through that collaboration in order to build trust and respect and make sure that everything is fair.
I love that. I love that example. Okay, over to Raven next.
So the thing that I say when I'm on a panel like this and I'm speaking about DevOps is to make sure that you actually need it. It is, people are pushing it, DevSecOps and all of these tools, everything. Do you actually need it? What is your pain point? What is wrong with your process right now? Or the way you're doing things, and the way you're doing work? Look at what it is that you're trying to improve. And if DevOps or implementing DevOps or Agile or those other tools that go with it are going to help, then that's great. If it's going to add overhead, don't do it, because you probably don't need it. And I say it from a place where we are a federal agency, the Smithsonian is, but we also work off of donor money. And the donors are actually what drives our projects. And sometimes DevOps just gets in the way of delivering when the donor wants it. And it's not, and it's a one-off, right? So we don't really have to have the process really go like this, and it's a small thing. So don't be pressured because everybody's saying that DevOps is the deal and it makes all this synergy and kumbaya. If it doesn't work for you, just don't do it. The end.
Thank you, Raven.
You're welcome.
And Brian, we are right on time. We are ending with you, sir.
There we go. Again, thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to spend time with all of you and share our experiences. I do believe that the sociocultural aspects of it are the most interesting, challenging, and beneficial parts. And by my gray hair, you can tell I was writing software in the 80s, and I've been through lots of waves. Right. And this is really just faster agile. I had somebody tell me that instead of riding a bicycle in agile, you're riding a motorcycle now, and it's a team sport. So I will reinforce that, but I'll bring you another thought, which is the crawl, walk, run. It seems like a number of folks here are very new to it. You're hearing some really great best practices from some really advanced teams here. Pick a project, pick a few champions. Figure out what you're doing already on an agile project where maybe you could move a little faster and institutionalize it. That's really a great way to think about it. I also often use the Toyota example. If you remember way back when, the Japanese organizations did two things. The first one is they brought in robots, and the second thing is they made it so anybody could pull the end-on cord. And in that model, they did two things. The reason they automated the manufacturing process with robots was not to eliminate humans. It was to create a reproducible, predictable, consistent delivery environment. So their car quality went from crap to good. So what you're really trying to do is automate things to make them more efficient. And the pulling the end-on cord meant that anybody on the production line at Toyota could pull the cord and stop the production and go fix a problem. Everyone in your development pipeline, from security QA all the way up through development, they should have that same empowerment. They should have that same feeling of responsibility. And so I encourage you to use things like Toyota stories, and there are many, that can help you kind of empower your teams to think outside the box about how to tackle this stuff.
Well, excellent. That was such a great way to end this panel discussion. I want to thank our panelists, of course, as well as everyone at home and the great questions that you sent in for us to cover. Thank you again to our partners at Now Secure, and we hope to see everyone again next week at our next Thursday event, which you can see is up on the screen now. It'll be on returning to the workplace using IT modernization to transform the workforce. So please go ahead and register for that if you've not already done so. And of course, as always, please answer if you would like your CPE credit for this webinar emailed to you. So thanks, everyone. It's been such a pleasure, and I look forward to doing this again soon. Bye.